The white satin dress felt like a shroud as Catherine Hayes stood alone in the small wooden church, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight while 200 guests whispered and shifted in their pews behind her. Her father had walked her down the aisle 15 minutes ago, his weathered hand trembling as he placed hers in the minister's keeping, and then retreated to his seat beside her weeping mother. The minister, Reverend Thompson, cleared his throat for the third time, his kind eyes darting between Catherine and the empty space where Thomas Whitmore should have been standing. The year was 1876, and Redemption, Colorado was a town small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, which meant that by sunset, the entire territory would know that Catherine Hayes had been left standing at the altar in her wedding dress. "Perhaps we should give him a few more minutes," Reverend Thompson suggested gently, though they both knew that Thomas was not coming. Catherine could hear her mother sobbing quietly, could feel the weight of pitying stares burning into her back through the delicate lace veil that had belonged to her grandmother. Her hands, clutched around a bouquet of wildflowers her younger sister had picked that morning, began to shake. "He is not coming," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I think we all know that now." A commotion at the back of the church made her turn, hope flaring stupidly in her chest. But it was not Thomas. Instead, a tall cowboy stood in the doorway, his broad-shouldered frame backlit by the Colorado sun. He held his hat in his hands, and even from a distance, Catherine could see the dust of the trail on his clothes and the grim set of his jaw. "Ma'am," he called out, his deep voice carrying through the suddenly silent church. "I am looking for Miss Catherine Hayes." "I am Catherine Hayes," she replied, lifting her chin even as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. "Though I suppose I will remain Miss Hayes, as it seems my groom has decided not to honor our engagement." The cowboy walked down the aisle with a measured stride, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. As he drew closer, Catherine could see that he was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that held both kindness and sorrow. He stopped a respectful distance from her and looked at Reverend Thompson before returning his gaze to Catherine. "My name is James Sullivan," he said quietly. "I own a ranch about 20 miles north of here. I was in town collecting supplies when I ran into Thomas Whitmore at the saloon." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "Miss Hayes, I am afraid I have difficult news. Thomas asked me to deliver a message. He said to tell you that he cannot go through with the wedding. He said he has had doubts for weeks but did not know how to tell you, and so he decided it would be easier to simply not show up. He caught the morning stage heading east and asked me to convey his apologies." The church erupted in shocked gasps and angry mutters. Catherine felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, and she swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the altar to steady herself. Thomas had not just gotten cold feet or been delayed. He had deliberately abandoned her, and he had been enough of a coward to send a stranger to deliver the news. "Did he say anything else?" Catherine asked, surprised that her voice still worked. James Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Nothing worth repeating, Mom. I will say that any man who would treat a woman so shamefully is not worthy of her regard." He looked around at the assembled guests, then back at Catherine. "If I may be so bold, Miss Hayes, I have a proposal." "A proposal?" Catherine repeated, wondering if she had fallen into some sort of fever dream. "You are standing here in your wedding dress with all these people gathered to witness a marriage," James said, his gray eyes steady on hers. "It seems to me that it would be a shame to waste such a beautiful dress and such a lovely ceremony. I am a man of means with a good ranch and an honest reputation. I came to town today looking for supplies, but I've been thinking for some time that what I really need is a wife. I would be honored if you would consider marrying me instead." The church fell completely silent. Catherine stared at this stranger who had just offered to marry her, searching his face for any sign of mockery or cruelty, but all she saw was sincerity. Her mind raced. The humiliation of being left at the altar would follow her for the rest of her life. She would become the object of pity and gossip, the poor girl who was not good enough to keep her man. Her prospects for another marriage in this small town were essentially non-existent. She was 22 years old, and she had just lost her chance at the life she had been planning. But this man, this James Sullivan, was offering her a way out. It was insane. It was impulsive. It was completely mad to even consider marrying a stranger just to save face. "Why would you do this, sure?" Catherine asked. "You do not know me. You have no obligation to me." "That is true," James acknowledged, "but I know enough. I know that you are brave enough to stand here with dignity when you have every right to collapse in tears. I know that you deserve better than the treatment you have received today, and I know that I have been looking for a wife for 2 years now without success, not because there are no good women, but because I have been too busy with the ranch to court anyone properly. This may not be a conventional beginning, but I give you my word that I would treat you with respect and kindness. I would give you my name, my protection, and an honest home. As for love, well, perhaps that could come with time, if we are both willing to try." Catherine looked at her parents. Her father had risen from his seat and was making his way toward her, his face red with fury, no doubt ready to defend her honor by throwing this presumptuous cowboy out of the church. But Catherine held up a hand to stop him. "Give me a moment to think," she said. Her mind worked rapidly, weighing her options. She could refuse James Sullivan's offer and walk out of this church as a jilted bride, returning to her parents' home to endure the pitying looks and whispered gossip. She could try to rebuild her life, though in a town this small, the stigma would never fully fade. Or she could accept this stranger's offer and walk out of this church as a married woman with her head held high. It was a gamble, but staying seemed like a guarantee of misery. She looked at James Sullivan again, really looked at him. He had kind eyes and a strong face. He had been decent enough to deliver Thomas's cowardly message in person rather than simply ignoring the situation. And he was offering her not just his name, but also his honesty. He had not promised her romance or passion, but he had promised respect, and in that moment respect seemed infinitely more valuable than the false promises Thomas had made. "If I agree to this," Catherine said slowly, "I want your word that you will never raise your hand to me in anger, that you will never humiliate me the way I have been humiliated today, and that you will give me the freedom to make my own choices about how I run your household." "You have my word on all of that," James said immediately. "I would add one more promise. If you find after a time that you cannot bear being married to me, I will not hold you against your will. I will make sure you have enough money to start a new life somewhere else, if that is what you need." It was more than Thomas had ever offered her. Catherine took a deep breath and turned to Reverend Thompson. "Would you be willing to perform a different ceremony?" she asked. "I believe I have a new groom." The minister blinked in surprise, then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "My dear, I think that would be the most satisfying wedding I have ever performed. Mr. Sullivan, if you would take your place here beside Miss Hayes." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Catherine's father blustered and argued, insisting that she was making a rash decision, but her mother surprised everyone by taking Catherine's hands and looking into her eyes with unexpected understanding. "Are you certain this is what you want?" her mother asked quietly. "I am certain that I want to leave this church as a married woman," Catherine replied. "And Mr. Sullivan seems like a good man. That is more than I can say for Thomas." Her mother nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing. Life rarely gives us the choices we expect, my dear. Sometimes we just have to make the best of what we are offered." James Sullivan stood beside her at the altar, and when Reverend Thompson asked if anyone objected to the union, the church remained silent. Catherine supposed that everyone was too shocked to protest. When it came time to exchange vows, James spoke his promises in a clear, steady voice, and Catherine found that her own voice did not waver. "I, Catherine Rose Hayes, take you, James Sullivan, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she said, the words feeling strange and momentous on her tongue. "I promise to be faithful and honest, to stand beside you in whatever life brings, and to treat you with the respect you have shown me today." When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, James leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Catherine's cheek. his lips warm and his manner respectful. The guests burst into confused applause, and Catherine found herself walking back down the aisle on the arm of a man she had met less than an hour ago, her wedding dress rustling around her ankles. Outside the church, reality began to settle in. She was married. She was married to a complete stranger. Catherine felt a wave of dizziness, and James must have noticed because his hand tightened on her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "I think so," Catherine managed. "This is just all very sudden." "It is," James agreed. "And I know this is not how you imagined your wedding day. I want you to know that I meant every word I said in there. I will do my best to be a good husband to you, Catherine." The reception had been planned at her parents' house, and despite the bizarre circumstances, Catherine's mother insisted that they proceed with it. The guests filtered over, some looking scandalized, others seeming almost amused by the dramatic turn of events. Catherine stood beside James, accepting congratulations and trying not to think about how different this day had become from what she had envisioned. Her best friend Mary pulled her aside when she had a chance. "Are you out of your mind?" Mary hissed, though her eyes were more concerned than judgmental. "You married a complete stranger?" "What else was I supposed to do?" Catherine whispered back. "Spend the rest of my life as the woman Thomas Whitmore abandoned? At least this way I have a chance at something better." "But you do not know anything about him," Mary insisted. "What if he is cruel? What if he's a drunk or a gambler?" "Reverend Thompson knows him," Catherine said, having managed to pull the minister aside for a quick conversation. "He said James Sullivan has a good reputation. His ranch is successful, and he is known for being fair and honest in his dealings. That is more than most women know about their husbands before marriage, Mary. How many matches are made by families without the couple having spent more than a few chaperoned hours together?" Mary bit her lip, unable to argue with that logic. "Just promise me you will be careful. And if you need anything at all, you send word immediately." Catherine promised, though she had no idea what Mary could do to help her if things went badly. The reception lasted for 2 hours, and then James approached her with his hat in his hands. "I hate to cut this short," he said, "but we have a 20-mile ride ahead of us, and I would prefer to reach the ranch before full dark. Are you ready to leave?" Catherine looked down at her wedding dress. "I should change into traveling clothes." "Of course," James said. "Take whatever time you need." Catherine went upstairs to her childhood bedroom and changed out of the white satin gown into a practical brown traveling dress. Her mother helped her pack a trunk with her belongings, both of them moving in near silence, the weight of the day's events making conversation difficult. "I am scared," Catherine finally admitted, as she folded her nightgowns into the trunk. Her mother pulled her into a tight embrace. "I know, sweetheart, but you are also brave. You showed that today. Mr. Sullivan seems like a decent man, and sometimes that is all we can hope for. Give him a chance. Give yourself a chance. And remember that you always have a home here if you need it." Catherine nodded against her mother's shoulder, blinking back tears. When the trunk was packed, her father carried it downstairs, his face still troubled but resigned. James had a sturdy wagon waiting, and he loaded the trunk into the back with ease, then helped Catherine climb up onto the bench seat beside him. "Thank you for everything," James said to her parents. "I promise I will take good care of your daughter." Her father grunted, clearly still unhappy with the situation, but her mother managed a tearful smile. "See that you do, Mr. Sullivan." The ride to the ranch was long and quiet. James did not try to force conversation, for which Catherine was grateful. She was exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day, and she needed time to process everything that had happened. The landscape rolled past, rugged and beautiful, with the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. As they traveled, Catherine snuck glances at her new husband. He had a strong profile and capable hands that held the reins with easy confidence. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, and she wondered what he was thinking. Did he regret his impulsive offer? Was he questioning his decision to marry a woman he did not know? "Tell me about your ranch," Catherine said finally, breaking the silence. James glanced at her, seeming almost surprised that she had spoken. It is called the Silver Creek Ranch because there is a creek that runs through the property, and in certain light, the water looks silver. I have about 500 acres with good grazing land and a decent herd of cattle. I also have a small operation breeding horses, which is my real passion. There's a main house that I built 3 years ago, a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various outbuildings. How many ranch hands do you employ? Catherine asked. 6 full-time men, and I hire additional help during roundup and branding season, James replied. They are good men, hard-working and loyal. I treat them fairly, and they repay that with honest work. Do you have family nearby? Catherine continued. James's expression darkened slightly. No. My parents died when I was young, and I was raised by an uncle in Texas. When he passed, he left me enough money to buy the ranch here in Colorado. I have a younger sister, but she married a merchant in San Francisco, and I have not seen her in 2 years. I am sorry, Catherine said softly. It must be lonely. It has been, James admitted. That is part of why I made the offer I did today. I have been thinking for a while now that the ranch is not enough. I want a family, Catherine. I want children and a wife to share my life with. I know this is not the romantic beginning you probably dreamed of, but I hope we can build something real together. His honesty touched her. I appreciate you being straightforward with me, Catherine said. Thomas and I were engaged for 8 months, and I thought I knew him. Clearly, I did not. At least with you, I know where I stand. They fell back into silence, but it was a more comfortable quiet this time. The sun was setting when they finally turned off the main road onto a smaller track that wound through rolling hills. After another mile, they crested a rise, and Catherine got her first look at the Silver Creek Ranch. The house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. In the fading light, she could see the barn and other outbuildings, all well maintained and sturdy. Smoke rose from the chimney of the bunkhouse, and she could see lanterns being lit in the windows. It is beautiful, Catherine said, and she meant it. James looked pleased. Thank you. I have put a lot of work into it. He drove the wagon up to the house and set the brake, then climbed down and came around to help Catherine descend. His hands were strong and steady on her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood very close together in the twilight. Welcome home, Catherine, James said quietly. The words made something twist in her chest, a strange mixture of fear and hope. This was her home now. This man was her husband. Her entire life had changed in the space of a few hours. James carried her trunk inside and lit the lamps, revealing a spacious main room with a large stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and windows that would offer beautiful views during the day. The house was clean and well-kept, though it had the slightly sparse look of a bachelor's dwelling. I will give you a tour tomorrow when there is better light, James said. For now, let me show you the bedroom. He picked up the trunk again and led her up a set of stairs to the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms, and he took her to the largest one. It held a big bed with a simple quilt, a wardrobe, a dresser, and a washstand. This will be your room, James said, setting the trunk down. My room is across the hall. I want you to understand that I will not force my attentions on you, Catherine. I know we are married, but I think we both need time to get to know each other before we share a bed as husband and wife. Catherine felt a rush of relief and gratitude. Thank you, she said. That means a great deal to me. James nodded. You must be exhausted. I will leave you to get settled. There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up, and I will have breakfast ready in the morning. If you need anything during the night, my door is open. After he left, Catherine sank down onto the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time that day. She cried for the humiliation of being abandoned, for the loss of the life she had thought she would have, and for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But she also cried with relief that the day was finally over and that she had somehow survived it with her dignity intact. Eventually, she washed her face, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like fresh air and sunshine, and despite everything, she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the events of the day. The next morning, Catherine woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory came flooding back. She was at the Silver Creek Ranch. She was married to James Sullivan. Her life had completely changed. She dressed quickly in a simple calico dress and braided her hair, then made her way downstairs. James was in the kitchen, standing at the stove. He had already changed into work clothes, and his sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a slight smile. "I hope you slept well." "I did, actually," Catherine replied, "better than I expected." "I am glad," James said. He dished up eggs, bacon, and toast onto 2 plates and carried them to the table. "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage breakfast." They ate together, and Catherine found herself relaxing slightly. James was easy to be around, not demanding or pushy, just quietly competent and kind. After breakfast, he gave her a proper tour of the house and the ranch. She met the ranch hands, who were polite and welcoming, though clearly surprised by the sudden appearance of a new bride. Over the next few weeks, Catherine settled into a routine at the ranch. She took over the cooking and cleaning and discovered that she enjoyed having a house to manage. James was a considerate husband, always respectful of her space and her wishes. They talked during meals, sharing stories about their lives and learning about each other slowly. Catherine told him about growing up in Redemption, about her siblings and her parents, about her dreams of having children and a garden. James told her about learning to ranch in Texas, about the challenges of starting his own operation, about his hopes for expanding the horse breeding program. As the weeks turned into months, Catherine found that she was actually happy. The humiliation of being left at the altar faded into memory, replaced by the satisfaction of building a life with James. He was kind and hard-working, and he treated her with a respect that Thomas never had. She began to realize that Thomas had often been dismissive of her opinions, had made decisions without consulting her, had expected her to simply go along with whatever he wanted. James was different. He asked her thoughts on everything from what to plant in the garden to how to handle a dispute between 2 ranch hands. He valued her input and treated her as a true partner. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when James reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her in anything more than a casual way since their wedding day, and Catherine felt her heart skip. "Catherine," James said quietly, "I need to tell you something. These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we married under unusual circumstances, and I promised you that love might come with time. I think for me, that time has come. I love you, Catherine. I love your strength and your kindness, your laugh and your sharp mind. I love the way you have made this house into a home. I am not asking you to say the same if you do not feel it, but I wanted you to know." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "James," she said, squeezing his hand, "I love you too. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. You have given me so much more than your name. You have given me respect and partnership and a happiness I never expected. I love you." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time, and Catherine felt something settle into place inside her. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not the giddy infatuation she had felt for Thomas, but something deeper and more solid, something real. That night, Catherine crossed the hallway to James's room, and they became husband and wife in truth. James was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and Catherine discovered a passion she had not known she was capable of. Afterward, lying in his arms, she marveled at how drastically her life had changed, and how grateful she was for that terrible day in the church that had led her to this moment. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the brilliant colors of changing leaves, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told James over breakfast one morning, and he was so overjoyed that he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing. "We are going to have a baby," James kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Catherine, we are going to be parents." "We are," Catherine confirmed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it, James said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. You have made me the luckiest man in Colorado. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and James became even more attentive if that was possible. He refused to let Catherine do any heavy lifting and insisted she rest whenever she showed even the slightest sign of tiredness. Catherine found it both endearing and slightly exasperating, but she let him fuss because she could see how much it meant to him. In December, when snow blanketed the ranch and the world seemed hushed and peaceful, Catherine went into labor. James rode through the storm to fetch the doctor from town, and by the time he returned with the elderly physician, Catherine had already been laboring for hours. The birth was long and difficult, but finally in the early hours of the morning, their son was born. He is perfect, James whispered, holding the tiny bundle with such tenderness that Catherine felt her heart might burst. He is absolutely perfect. They named him William, after James's father, and he was indeed perfect. He had dark hair like his father and blue eyes that Catherine hoped would stay that color. As Catherine held her son and watched her husband gaze at them both with such love and wonder, she thought about that terrible day at the church almost a year ago. Thomas Whitmore had abandoned her at the altar, and at the time it had felt like the end of the world. But it had actually been a beginning. If Thomas had not been a coward, she would never have married James. She would never have found this deep, abiding love. She would never have had this beautiful son. What are you thinking about? James asked, settling onto the edge of the bed beside her. I am thinking about how strange life is, Catherine said, how something that seems like the worst thing that could happen can turn out to be the best thing. James understood immediately. I have thought about that too, he admitted. I know I should not be grateful that Thomas hurt you, but I cannot help being glad that he did because it brought you to me. I am glad too, Catherine said. I used to think love was supposed to be all passion and romance, but I have learned that real love is this. It is partnership and respect and choosing each other every day. It is building a life together and weathering the storms together. It is this. James leaned down and kissed her gently. It is definitely this, he agreed. The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a sturdy, curious little boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere around the ranch. When William was 2, Catherine gave birth to a daughter, Sarah, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Michael. The ranch prospered under James's careful management, and Catherine's garden became famous throughout the county for its abundant produce. They expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch hands came and went, but a few became permanent fixtures, men who were loyal to James and respectful to Catherine, who treated the Sullivan children like beloved nephews and niece. Catherine's parents came to visit regularly, and her mother often commented on how happy Catherine seemed, how marriage agreed with her. Mary, her best friend, married a shopkeeper in Redemption and also had children, and the two families would get together for holidays and celebrations. Occasionally, Catherine would hear news of Thomas Whitmore. He had settled in St. Louis and married a banker's daughter, a marriage that apparently was more about business connections than affection. Catherine felt nothing when she heard these updates, no bitterness or longing, just a mild curiosity about what had become of the man who had once been so important to her. One spring evening when they had been married for 7 years, Catherine and James sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. William was 9, Sarah was 5, and Michael was 3. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. Do you ever regret it? James asked suddenly. Marrying me the way you did? Catherine turned to look at him in surprise. Never, she said firmly. Not once. Why would you ask that? James shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I just sometimes think about how impulsive it was, how little time you had to decide. I worry that maybe you felt forced into it, that maybe you would have preferred to wait and marry someone you had chosen more carefully. Catherine reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. James Sullivan, she said, you are the best choice I ever made. Yes, it was impulsive. Yes, it was terrifying. but it was also the bravest thing I have ever done, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. You have given me everything I ever wanted: a home, a family, a partnership built on trust and respect, and a love that gets stronger every year. I chose you, James. Maybe not in a conventional way, but I chose you. And I would choose you again every single day. James pulled her close and kissed her, and Catherine melted into his embrace, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. As the years continued to pass, their children grew and thrived. William showed a natural talent for working with horses, and by the time he was 15, he was training young colts with a skill that rivaled his father's. Sarah was quieter and more bookish, with a love of learning that led James to hire a tutor for her, much to Catherine's delight. Michael was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and coming home covered in mud, but with such a cheerful disposition that it was impossible to stay angry with him for long. The ranch continued to prosper, and James and Catherine became respected members of the community. They were known for their fairness, their generosity, and the strength of their marriage. Other couples would sometimes ask them for advice, and Catherine would always tell the same story about how they met, emphasizing that a good marriage was built on respect and partnership rather than just passion. When Catherine was 35, her parents both passed away within months of each other, her father from a heart attack and her mother from grief and pneumonia. It was a difficult time, but James was there for her through all of it, holding her when she cried and helping her settle her parents' affairs. At the funeral, Catherine's siblings all gathered, and her brother commented on how lucky she had been to find James. "You really were fortunate," he said. "After what Thomas did, it could have been so much worse for you." Catherine smiled through her tears. "It was not luck," she said. "It was James being brave enough to make an unconventional offer, and me being brave enough to accept it. We made our own fortune." As Catherine moved through her 30s and into her 40s, she watched her children grow into fine young adults. William married a sweet girl from town and started his own ranch on land that James helped him purchase. Sarah became a teacher, much to everyone's pride, and moved to Denver to work at a prestigious girls' school. Michael joined the cavalry and wrote long letters home about his adventures. Through it all, Catherine and James remained each other's anchor. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and financial setbacks, always facing challenges together. Their love, which had started as a practical arrangement and blossomed into genuine affection, deepened into something unshakable. They knew each other's moods and thoughts so well that they could often communicate without words. They had inside jokes and shared memories, and even after decades of marriage, they still made time to sit on the porch together in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset. One summer evening, when they had been married for 25 years, their children organized a surprise anniversary celebration. William came from his ranch with his wife and 3 children. Sarah traveled from Denver. Michael got leave from his cavalry post. The house was full of laughter and noise, with grandchildren running everywhere and the table groaning under the weight of a feast that took all day to prepare. After dinner, William stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, "to my parents, who have shown all of us what a real marriage looks like. You have built something extraordinary together, not just this ranch, but a family and a legacy of love and respect. Thank you for being such an incredible example. Happy anniversary." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. She looked at James and saw that his eyes were also wet. "Did you ever imagine this?" she whispered to him. "That day in the church?" "No," James admitted. "I hoped for something good, but this exceeds anything I could have dreamed. You have made my life complete, Catherine." "You saved me that day," Catherine said. "You offered me your name and your honest love, and you changed everything." "We saved each other," James corrected gently. "I was just a lonely rancher before you came into my life. You turned a house into a home and gave me a family. We did this together." As the evening wore on and the grandchildren were put to bed and the adult children lingered over coffee and conversation, Catherine looked around at the life she had built and felt a profound sense of contentment. She thought about the girl she had been, standing in that church in a white dress, watching her dreams crumble. That girl had been so certain she knew what her life would be, had been so invested in a future that turned out to be built on sand. But that girl had also been brave enough to take a chance on a stranger who offered her hope when she had none. That girl had trusted her instincts and made a leap of faith that had led to all of this house full of love, these children and grandchildren, this marriage that had become the foundation of everything good in her life. Time continued its inexorable march. Catherine and James grew older together, their hair turning gray and then white, their faces acquiring the lines and wrinkles of a life well lived. The ranch eventually passed to William, though James remained active and involved well into his 60s. Sarah married a professor in Denver and had 2 children of her own. Michael left the cavalry and became a rancher in Montana, visiting as often as he could. Through it all, Catherine and James remained devoted to each other. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with an even bigger party than their 25th, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They had outlived most of their contemporaries, but their love had also outlasted everything else. 50 years, Catherine marveled as they sat on the porch that evening after all the guests had left. Can you believe it has been 50 years since that day in the church? It seems like both yesterday and a lifetime ago, James said. His voice was raspier now, his movement slower, but his hand in hers was as warm and steady as ever. I have never regretted a single moment of it, Catherine. You have been the greatest blessing of my life. And you have been mine, Catherine said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the comfort of his presence, the solidity of him beside her. Thank you for offering me your name that day. Thank you for seeing something in me worth taking a chance on. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes, James replied. Thank you for building this life with me. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had cultivated and loved for half a century. The ranch stretched out before them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and dedication. But more than that, it was a testament to love, to the kind of love that grew from respect and partnership, from choosing each other every day even when things were difficult. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Colorado sky, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about Thomas Whitmore, the man who had abandoned her, and she felt nothing but gratitude. His cowardice had set her on a different path, a better path, one that had led to more joy and fulfillment than she had ever imagined possible. She thought about the young woman she had been, standing in that church in her white dress, her world collapsing around her. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to despair, that the best was yet to come. She wished she could tell her that the cowboy who walked through those church doors with bad news would turn out to be the answer to prayers she had not even known to pray. But mostly she was just grateful. Grateful for James, for their children, for the life they had built together. Grateful for the courage to take a chance and the wisdom to see that real love was not always what you expected, but it was always worth fighting for. I love you, James Sullivan, Catherine said into the quiet evening. I love you too, Catherine Sullivan, James replied, always and forever. And there on the porch of the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had stood the test of time, they sat hand in hand, 2 people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other, watching the stars come out over the Colorado wilderness and knowing that they had found something rare and precious. A love that was true and lasting, a love that had transformed them both, a love that would endure even beyond the boundaries of their mortal lives. The ranch would continue. Their children and grandchildren would carry on the legacy they had created, but the real legacy was not the land or the cattle or even the family name. The real legacy was the love story they had written together, a story that began with heartbreak and courage and blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. It was a story that proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that sometimes taking a risk on love is the bravest thing we can do, and that sometimes the person who saves us is the one we least expect. And so Catherine and James Sullivan lived out their days in happiness and contentment, secure in the knowledge that they had found what everyone searches for: a true partner, a genuine love, and a life that exceeded all their wildest dreams. The white dress Catherine had worn that fateful day was packed away in a trunk in the attic, a relic of a past that seemed like it belonged to someone else. Because the woman she had become, the woman who had built this ranch and raised these children and loved this man, was so far beyond that frightened bride that they hardly seemed like the same person. But they were the same person. Catherine had simply grown into herself, had found her strength and her purpose, had discovered that love was not something that happened to you, but something you built with intention and care. And James had been there for all of it, her partner and her love, the cowboy who had offered his name and his honest heart, and who had never once given her reason to regret saying yes. As they grew even older into their 70s, they remained inseparable. When James's health began to fail, Catherine nursed him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. And when Catherine suffered a fall that left her bedridden for months, James sat by her side every day, reading to her and holding her hand, refusing to let her face the challenge alone. They died within 6 months of each other, James first and then Catherine, both surrounded by their children and grandchildren, both at peace and ready for whatever came next. At Catherine's funeral, her eldest son William stood to give the eulogy, and he told the story of how his parents had met, of the impulsive wedding that had raised eyebrows throughout the county, but had resulted in the strongest marriage anyone had ever seen. "My mother used to say that being left at the altar was the best thing that ever happened to her," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "because it brought her to my father. And my father used to say that walking into that church was the luckiest moment of his life. They built something extraordinary together, something that all of us have benefited from. They showed us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, and that the right choice can change everything." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their gravestones simple but elegant, bearing their names and the years of their lives. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still operated under the Sullivan name, and in the story that was told and retold at family gatherings, the story of how a cowboy walked into a church and offered his name to a heartbroken bride, and how that single act of kindness and courage had created a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond.